shortlisted entries, and his work is Death to Books, which is a sequence of poetic texts or fragments which draw together the idea of death and the experience of reading and a sensed connection between them. And they evolve that through these fragments, which seem together to be able to ask this question, which sounds something like, what is it that experiences at the edge of what is bearable what might that show us about what it is that we look for and indeed often find when we pick up a book? And again, this writing, which circled around the same themes, but in that produced lines of extraordinarily kind of crystalline lines that seemed so irreducible, it was almost as if they'd written themselves. And in this, the way that the writing came back, it kept staging this encounter between ideas of death and ideas of grief and ideas of books in a way that was mutually enriching, because you felt that you were always thinking one at the same time as with some part of your mind you were thinking the other, so that in that way it was expansive, but at the same time it was also distilling, because the thought of death with the thought of reading beside it was able to go a step further than it would normally be able to go. And it was an extraordinary read which floored us. So I look forward to hearing it.
Thank you, Kate. I think you introduced the book and described it much better than I could, so about half of my introduction I'm going to throw away at this point. I guess I'll add that the little extract that I'm about to read is from the first half, about 6 fragments from the first half of the text. And as you suggested, it's combining or trying to tell 2 stories at once, and I think in some ways failing to do that, but finding something fruitful or re-energizing in the failure itself. The text is very distracted. It seems to be finding comfort and lifelines and holes to hide in as it proceeds. And I think in the end, those hiding places sort of become the subject of the text in a strange way. Broadly speaking, there are kind of 2 stories being told, 2 deaths being thought about, one that is literal and the other figurative, sort of death as a reader that I hope that other people have encountered as well at different points in their lives, where trauma can kind of erase or contract one's willingness to read or one's pleasure in reading. That's already saying too much. 1. Sometimes, for a little while, clouds gather into the shape of an animal, and that's you. There's stuff. And right now, one of the things that stuff is your body. And over the coming years, it's going to slowly disband again, fraying at the edges until eventually it isn't recognizable as you anymore. And it goes on to be other things: ships, crickets, glycerin, laughter, etc. The first time those clouds gathered into the form of a book was about 2,000 years ago. But most of those early formations have long since come apart. There are a few that still look like books enough to be interesting, and there are people whose job it is to stop them from coming apart any more than they already have. And they do this by putting them inside glass boxes where there's no wind. I have met people whose job this is, and they are very interesting, because their job is to put old things in boxes and suck the time out. They have to make sure none of it slips back in before they can get the lid on. 2. When my mum was getting ready to take her life, She put on her best dress and opened a bottle of wine. Even this terrible thing she did with a beautiful and desperate self-care. Care too for the people who'd find her, because it's clear she researched how to avoid harming others by sealing the bedroom door with masking tape and opening the window a crack. I still find some of her love in all this. Some people take automatic rifles and fire them into a crowd as a final hurrah. Others take the opposite route and search for a way of dying that will be as bearable and mess-free as possible for the people who discover them. My mum was the second kind. One thing I understand about her death, among the many things I don't, is that there was no spite in it. 3. Yet, in her concern for making a tidy death, my mum overlooked that other kind of mess, which is grief and guilt and confusion. There are other people who discovered her body once, and there are other people who have discovered her body every day since. If I resent one thing, it's that the care she showed towards those who found her body eclipsed the care she showed towards those who would go on finding it for the rest of their lives. 4. My dad has a wardrobe full of John Grisham novels. I really admire that. Not so much the Grisham, I haven't read him, but that he keeps them in the wardrobe, stacked under his hanging trousers and shirts, with the shelf below full of boxes of completed tax returns, and below that, shoes. 5. What does my dad's wardrobe of books say about him? Perhaps that he thinks of reading as something people do to be civil, like wearing your clothes and doing your taxes. Something people do because it's what people do. Or perhaps that he thinks of doing his taxes and dressing for work as a sort of fantasy, a fiction. Not a wardrobe full of books, then, but a bookcase full of clothes. 6. I sit here surrounded by shelves of books, completely disinterested in picking any of them up. My books have become a kind of wall hanging, something to look at, not to use. But they take up more space than anything else I own. Imagine turning your home into an ice skating museum and then deciding you hate ice skating. That's me. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Luke. That was great to hear those read.